Hello everybody. I want to welcome you to the 1960s, where councils had rejected classical architecture in favour of playing Minecraft with concrete. Unfortunately, they tended to play this in places where classical architecture stood. This is 3 times Newcastle Council horrifically murdered gorgeous Georgian buildings. The horror of Westgate House. Well, first we find ourselves on Westgate Road, which follows the course of Hadrian's Wall, and had, until the 1960s, we can assume, never seen any brutalism. Well, not of the building type anyway. But then came Westgate House. Now, in order to appreciate the sheer lunacy of this decision, I'm going to show you what Westgate Road, this part of it, looked like before they did this. This part of Newcastle, next to the central station, was actually so pretty that it shows up in lots of early postcards of the area. This monument is called the Stevenson's Monument, and it was supposed to represent the different aspects of Stevenson's work. But then, in the 1960s, the council thought that they knew better, and they did this. Now, not one person, not a few people, but a whole planning department, presumably after a night of heavy drinking, signed off on this monstrosity of a hangover of a building, and hangover it did, right across the road, blocking the view of the beautiful Collingwood Street. Apparently the planners said this building represented a modern vision of the gates of Newcastle. Well, a vision it certainly is, like something from a failed communist state. Amazingly, this building remained in place until the early noughties, when finally the council sobered up from their 70s LSD binge and wondered what they had done. It has now been replaced with this somewhat more subdued building, but I think you'll agree, it doesn't match the elegance of the originals. The evil of Swan House Roundabout. Now, who didn't love the 60s obsession with cars? Cars were the future. Everyone would have one, even babies. And in order to accommodate these cars, we were going to need roads. We were going to need roads everywhere, all the time. So, in order to do this, the council were going to have to get the opposite of medieval on Newcastle City Centre. Why don't we just demolish the Royal Arcade, which has been there since the 1830s? One of the finest pieces of architecture in Newcastle. Now, this one wasn't going to go without a fight. There was a lot of public anger about the demolition of this. The council argued that it wasn't really used very much anymore, and that what they would do was they would number each brick of it, take it down, put it on some waste ground, and then one day they could rebuild it. Yeah, what actually happened was they realised that the cost of rebuilding it would be outrageous, so they scattered the parts all around the parks of Newcastle where they still stand to this day. But wait, the Royal Arcade wasn't the only thing standing in the way of Swan House Roundabout, because there was also the Holy Jesus Hospital. Now this site had been there for 700 years helping the townspeople, so this one the council was going to find difficult to demolish. And it wasn't demolished, it's still there today. But we'll come back to what it looks like now, later, because first, I need to explain why they did all this. Well, to build a giant roundabout, of course, and on the top of the roundabout, a lovely 60s office block. So, this is what the area where the Royal Arcade was looks like now. And this is what they did to avoid having to knock down the Holy Jesus Hospital. But it gets even weirder than that. Rather than people walking alongside the roads, they were all going to walk on these little funny walkways. So you better have planned where you're going exactly, otherwise you're going to be turning around and walking all the way back. And just to add some spice to all this, the car fumes will float gently up to these walkways and poison you while you do so. And sadly, unlike Westgate House, this pile of shite still stands to this day. It's been converted into flats so Newcastle can have slums of the future. Those walkways though, they're gone. Well, mostly. They've left little bits of them dotted around, I think as a warning to their future selves not to do anything like this again. The brutalisation of Eldon Square. Eldon Square, once the jewel of Newcastle's crown, if you imagine Newcastle as a hat. A fantastic Georgian square with one of the world's oldest private members' clubs in the centre of it. What better way to celebrate the 1970s than to demolish it and replace it with the entrance to a shopping centre? Now, the history of Eldon Square dates back to 1824, when John Dobson was commissioned by Richard Granger to produce designs for Eldon Square. Now, this was built to be impressive. The east and west terraces had 27 bays of windows, whilst the north terrace had 39 bays. Now remember, this was back when the window tax was still a thing, so owning one of these houses was making a statement. The centre of the square was initially a private park with key holders only, but it was later turned into a public park for the city. This later had a war memorial placed in it, which you can see in these photographs. Now, the actual destruction of the square was a slow process. Plans to build a modern shopping centre in Newcastle had been around since the early 60s, but finally, after some back and forth arguments about building a giant hotel on the spot and a few other plans, the shopping centre did go ahead. So, in the early 70s, the demolition of Eldon Square began. And here is what it looks like now. But wait, for Eldon Square fought back, and due to planning issues, one side survives as a reminder of how good it could have looked had it still been there today. But the 1970s have heard, and they're furious, and they have fought back with this ridiculous design revealed by the council in 2020. Yes, they are suggesting replacing the grass with concrete. Hope you enjoyed that video. It was a little more light-hearted than usual, and I'd like to do a series of them because, believe me, these three are not the only three architectural disasters in the north of England. I borrowed a couple of the images used in today's videos from other websites, so I've put the links to those in the YouTube information box, and you should go and visit those links if you want to learn more about some of the buildings featured in today's video. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for liking the video and subscribing if you chose to. Don't have nightmares about concrete, and do sleep classically.